Welcome back to The Talk You Never Had, a podcast about sex education. I'm your host, Talia.
And I'm your co-host, Juno.
On this podcast, we're going to talk about sex, specifically all the things they didn't talk to you about in school or home. For our first mini episode, we're going to talk about why it's important to talk about and what kinds of topics you can look forward to next time.
So what we're going to cover in this podcast is consent, healthy relationships, STDs and how to prevent them, and then what is sex, because there's so many different kinds, and we're also going to talk about sexuality and gender.
So we both noticed that within our community there is a need to talk about this, a need for this resource. I'm from Utah, so I grew up with a very large influence of Mormon culture, and that stuff isn't really talked about within this community, so therefore it wasn't really allowed to be taught within our schools. So a lot of the stuff I learned was from my parents and from a program called Teen Council. And I think Juno can relate to that because...
Yeah, I'm from California, but I did grow up in the Mormon church, and so that heavily influenced every aspect of my education. Anything I did find out was from my peers, which middle schoolers don't know very much about sex or sex education, so it was more harmful than helpful.
And I think there's a lot of fear about teaching kids these words because it makes people feel like, well, if I teach them, then they're going to start being sexually active, and that's not necessarily true. I personally was taught about what sex was at 5 years old, and I did not have sex till much later in life, mostly because I knew what it was and because I knew what I needed from a partner that if I wanted to have sex. And that's because my parents took the time to talk to me about that, and I'm very thankful for that.
And I'm kind of on the opposite spectrum of that, of I never received any kind of sex education. From the time I was a kid, I didn't even know the names of my body parts, and I was taken advantage of from the time that I was 5 years old. So I think it's really important to educate yourself and your kids on these things.
I think what we've both come to the conclusion of is if we had education in our lives from an early age, that it can empower us to make choices for ourselves and set boundaries and talk to people about experiences we're having, what is normal, what isn't.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for listening, and join us next time on The Talk You Never Had. Stay safe out there.